South Korea has a new president. I talk about copyright and we visit Tonga all this week and more. Coming up next, the QiRanger podcast starts now. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the QiRanger podcast. I am Steve Miller, not the musical artist, but just Steve Miller, the QiRanger. Hope you're having a fantastic day, and if you celebrate Christmas, it's coming up this week, so Merry Christmas. Happy Christmas if you're in the UK, and I guess if you're in the United States, Kwanzaa's coming. Oh yeah, baby. Festival of a different sort of lights, shall we say. This week has been an amazing week in Korea, and just after the elections broke, I started getting questions about my thoughts, and I was letting everyone know that this week on the podcast, the presidential elections results here in Korea would be the lead story. So let's get to it. Let's get to the news. Oh yeah, baby. So this past Wednesday, the 19th of December, was the 18th Democratic elections here in Korea. And this was an incredibly tightly contested race. The two main candidates, Park Geun-hye and Moon Jae-in, were pretty much expected to just take everything and go to the banks. Around the country, voters were really making their feelings heard. And in my observation and in Joe's observations, older voters were leaning towards Park Geun, and younger voters were looking to vote for Moon Jae-in. Ultimately, the election was amazing. As I sat at home and watched the Twitter feed and all the news updates from all the sources around the country, I could not believe what was happening. So let's take a look at the numbers. So they estimated about 40 million residents of Korea were eligible voters. 75.8% was the voter turnout rate. That is amazing. And a lot of the pundits said that if the voter turnout was around 70%, that would be better for Park Geun-hye. And if it was over 75%, that would benefit Moon Jae-in. What actually took place was Park Geun-hye came out with 51.9% of the popular vote, and Moon Jae-in came in at 47.7%. Around 9:30, most of the networks here called it for Park Geun-hye, and at 10:30 p.m. on Wednesday evening, she had her victory speech. Now, this means that Park Geun-hye is the first daughter of a former president, the first female president, the first unmarried president, and I have to say, I'm ecstatic that as a politician, she was able to campaign on her politics and her policies rather than her gender. That is amazing. I think it also shows a vote of confidence that in the political arena, women are just as capable as men. And I hope that one day in the United States, a woman is ultimately elected president. Now, in terms of politics, she is from the current ruling party, the Tsunari Party, and the only real change that many see coming about this is in terms of changing the attitude of South Korea towards North Korea. Both candidates, Moon Jae-in and Park Geun-hye, already said that they are going to change the stance of the current administration towards North Korea. Whether or not that actually takes place, only time will tell. Time will also be a good determiner if her campaign promises actually come through to fruition. Politicians love making promises during the campaign. However, once in office, very rarely do they actually have the ability and the power to actually carry them out. So I'm not really sure what is going to take place once she's in office. Personally, I wasn't leaning towards one person or the other during the election. seeing as how I don't get to vote here. But I am interested in seeing what is going to take place. I have seen a number of my younger friends around Korea express dismay that Moon Jae-in did not win, but also they realize that, hey, the people spoke, and Park Geun-hye is now the president-elect. She takes office in February and has a single 5-year term, which I also think is the direction that the United States needs to go in for a lot of their political offices, because so much time is spent on campaigning to keep your job that essentially during your first term as president or your term in Congress is always spent out on the campaign trail. If they just limit it to here's your single term, you're out after this, you can come back after one term away, but this allows you to focus all your energy on the office. So exciting times here in Korea, and I'm looking forward to seeing how well this plays out. And if you don't really understand the ramifications of this, aside from Park Geun-hye being a woman, her father was a president here in Korea, and he was pretty much, well, let's just say it, he was a dictatorship, shall we say, in '87. He ruled with an iron fist, but because of that rule, Korea was able to really come out of the economic hardships and really develop into the nation that he has now. But he was able to run successfully in open elections and continuously be elected. So say what you will about his domestic policies, he did a lot for the country, and Park Geun-hye during the election apologized for a lot of the missteps and misgivings that he did or people had about him. So she made good points there. So those are my thoughts on the election, but there's a lot more news going on this week. So let's go on with some interesting information about the rocket launch that took place last week with North Korea. Some reports were coming out that the United States gave intel to Japan all the way up until the missile launch, but that information wasn't freely shared with the ROK government. And it's not really sure what information was handed over to Japan, or if in fact it was confirmed that information was handed over to Japan. But I would say that if the United States is playing favorites here and giving information to one country and not the other, especially when we're talking North Korea and they have a huge military presence in here, in this country, I would find that a little bit disturbing. I'm assuming that whatever information was relayed was given to U.S. Armed Forces Korea, but possibly not the ROK government. And that's a no-no. That is a no-no. You must share the intel if you're going to have troops on the ground. That's my thoughts on that. As my students are completing their their academic semester, many are entering the military for their 2-year mandatory service. In fact, one of my students who have had for an entire year just entered the Navy this past week. And an interesting study came out. Many who are going into the military service find it an imposition, saying that they're giving their best prime years to the country and are asked to have their lives put on hold. Now, right now, compulsory service is between 21 and 24 months for men only, and the duration depends on the actual area of service that you are in. Chung Min-jae came out and said, "The day I completed my service was the best day of my life so far. He is 24. He served 23 months as a Katusa, which is a Korean Army individual who's attached to a U.S. military regiment or military group. The hardest thing being in the Army is that you are stuck in one place for 2 years while everyone else continues to move forward with their lives." Another person said that when the Cheonan, the South Korean naval frigate that was destroyed by North Korea, was destroyed, they really thought that they were going to war, and then nothing happened. So they got really agitated, and then they had to get up and do nothing. They were on high alert for several days. No showers, no nothing. They were just on high alert time after time again, told that they were going to go to war. But then ultimately nothing happened. South Korean children have been taught in public schools that North Korean children are their poor brothers and sisters, and that someday that they must seek a reconciliation for a unified nation. But many in South Korea do not feel that attachment to their North Korean brethren, and that what they really want is just normalized relations and an end to the hostility on the peninsula. I thought it was an interesting read, and like I think I mentioned earlier this season, or if not this season, last semester on the podcast, season 2 on the podcast, many of my students feel the same way. I asked that, I believe, the first or second week of school, and many of the men do not want to go into military service. Those that do think of it as a way for them to become more manly. And the women in my classes wanted the men to go away so they would become more manly. But if given the opportunity for women to serve, all the ladies said, hell no. And the men said, no, it's not a woman's place to do it. So I'm really not sure what the answer is. The men are expressing an idea that they don't want to go to compulsory service. However, with the nation technically still at war, what you going to do? What are you going to do? Because North Korea is ramping up their cyber terrorism. They are still an isolated and calculating country. So you have to keep an eye on that. I also saw a story earlier this week that on FaceRead, it was very, very interesting. 1 out of 10 inpatients had their illnesses wrongly diagnosed from medical doctors, according to a survey conducted by the Korean Health and Medical Workers Union. And this was a nationwide study. And the wrong diagnoses were diverse, ranging from misjudgments of disease names to terminal cases, listed as only being in early stages. Now, as many as 3.7% experienced wrong injections that might have serious consequences, and 0.9% received the wrong type of blood. 2.2% got infected at hospitals, and the figure was higher, as much as 2.9% in larger hospitals when the beds were over 150. But let's, as I said, that was a huge thing. 10% with wrong diagnoses. I was going, holy smokes, that's crazy. But then I did some extra research, and I found one study, and it focused on the United States. And this is a very broad study, and the results were kind of convoluted, shall we say. And they said in the United States, anywhere between 4 and 49% of a medical error rate at U.S. hospitals. Now, 4%, of course, is on the low side, with routine diagnoses going a little bit on the varying side, whereas the 49% error was for really rare cases of diseases where a patient presents themselves with a series of symptoms, the doctor makes a call, and then later it turns out that, oh, that's not the right call, but it was because it was a very rare disease. So people taking a look at this news report with a 10% error rate they need to really put it in perspective, because it isn't an isolated instance of just Korean medicine. It is a global issue, and even a country with as advanced medical technology and medical services as the United States, in some cases has a 50-50 chance of producing medical errors. So I just want to put that out there, because I think a lot of people, when they come to Korea, are concerned about how they will be treated at hospitals, whether or not Korean medicine is up to snuff. And if you just look at the low end of the spectrum, United States, with a far greater population, having a 4% error rate, and Korea being close to 10%, it's pretty comparable. So always do your homework before you go to the doctor, do your research at the hospital. Always ask a lot of questions, but I thought it was a really interesting article that came out. Dunkin' Donuts is also in the news here in Korea because of Coffeegate. Oh, speaking of coffee, Coffeegate. For those listening on the podcast, I'm sorry, I'm going to have some coffee right now. So good, oh yeah. Dunkin' Donuts was caught selling old coffee. Now this is in a special hand drip product that they sell here in Korea. And if you're not familiar with it, I really like the concept of instant hand drip coffee. So what they have done, and if you're here in Korea and you get a chance to go to the cafe show or the coffee expo, they have the big machines that make these out here, and they're wonderful. You have essentially a tea bag with fresh ground coffee in it. And the tea bag opens up, has an open top, and then arms that you can set over the edges of your coffee. And then you pour in hot water. And as the hot water filters through the coffee, it brews, and then voila, you have some great tasting coffee. Rather than going the instant route, you can have fresh hand drip coffee in an instant type container. It's brilliant. It tastes great. I've had the opportunity to have several different varieties of here. But essentially what was happening here in Korea is Dunkin' Donuts was selling coffee that was past the expiration date. And in some cases, they were mixing old beans with new beans, and they got caught with their pants down, and they're having to recall all the old beans and sell new ones and exchange them for new coffees. To me, I really can't tell the difference between a coffee bean that quote-unquote has been expired, but if you're going to put an expiration date on a product, you got to adhere to it. Drinking is changing in South Korea. And I thought this was interesting as well. We've spoken many times about the drinking culture in Korea, both on the podcast and in videos and in vlogs. So wine is now outselling beer, soju, and traditional alcohol in Korea. Specifically red wine. It's having an uptick with the younger audiences. And even though liquor, specifically Scotch, is also on the increase, wine is now surpassing anybody out. It is being consumed, it's up 4.6% this year over last year. But I thought the interesting thing about this study, this news article, was that overall alcohol purchases were down 2.2% for the year. So even though the distribution of what's being purchased is going up in some cases, drastically changing, the overall consumption is going down. And I don't know the reason for that, because when I go out, I still see a lot of alcohol being purchased. Sorry, another coffee break. And you go to the big warehouse stores, you go to all the markets, there are still massive displays of alcohol. You go to the checkout line and you still see people buy pitchers of beer. And pitchers are what we call, we do have six packs here in Korea, but pitchers are typically 1,000 milliliters, a liter bottle or a 1.6 liter bottle of beer, and that's how large quantities are sold here. It's actually quite nice. You go into the market, you pick up a 1.6 liter of beer, and you go and share it with your friends. It's fantastic rather than having to deal with six packs. I love it. So that was interesting. Also, the Korea Workers' Compensation and Welfare Service said that working at Samsung Electronics caused breast cancer in a female employee that ultimately died. Now, this is the second time that a high court has ruled that working for Samsung caused cancer and resulted in a death. And this is huge. Samsung says that they are not going to appeal the government's decision. And since this is the world's largest maker of computer memory chips, I wonder what's going to happen in the future. Think about it. With this ruling, will other workers who have developed cancer take it to their own governments, their own court systems, and say, hey, I have cancer, Samsung caused it. With these two rulings, it sets a dangerous precedent. Now, I'm not saying that working at Samsung didn't cause the cancer, but I can't really think about another case that's similar to this in recent time where working at a chip factory, a computer company, that has resulted in a decision like this. As I said, this is only the second one here in Korea. I think it is going to possibly catch on like wildfire around the world and lead to many other instances of lawsuits against major companies where workers develop cancer. And if it can be proven that the work environment causes cancer, then absolutely 100% the company is responsible and should pay for all the treatment. Pay for all the treatment, 100%. Not even say like, oh, well, we give you medical coverage and that's what you have to deal with. No, you caused the cancer, you have to pay 100%. Make the environment safe. In North Korean news, many people are wondering if the missile launch means war, and I have to say, no, it does not. The missile, while it did ultimately get the satellite into space, some say it was wobbly, some say it's stable. It looks like it is stable. North Korea is using outdated parts, and it really doesn't mean that they have the ability to deliver a weapons payload to a terrestrial target. They can get something into space, which a lot of South Koreans are pissed off about because they haven't been able to launch a missile into orbit yet. So you have North Korea using outdated, old Russian technology able to launch a missile into space, and South Korea can't do it. I really hope the next attempt, I believe it's going to be in February or March, finally gets a missile up there and actually at a higher orbit, a more stable orbit, a more easily identified orbit. South Korea also has collected a lot of the debris from the missile launch and is currently examining that as well. But in terms of armed conflict, North Korea, I still don't believe it could go toe-to-toe with South Korea, the United States, Japan, or any of the other armed nations in the area. Where it seems to have an edge is in the cyber warfare area. And time again, they have proven that they can launch successful DDoS attacks here in South Korea. With the missile launch, many have called for more UN sanctions, but let's just face it, these sanctions are ineffective. North Korea has expressed several times that they really don't care about the sanctions. They're going to do what they want to do. They're going to carry out their arms trades. They're going to develop their nuclear program. They are going to do exactly what they want to do. The sanctions, as they stand, are ineffective. Now, since North Korea is part of the United Nations, they are bound by UN resolutions. As they continue to do their own thing, they're breaking the UN resolutions, which of course leads to the sanctions. But since, and this is my view, if North Korea continues down this road of action, the UN needs to make a decision. Either employ sanctions that actually are enforceable and make a difference, or simply kick North Korea out. If you don't want to come to the party and play by the rules, you don't get to come to the party. It's a dangerous step to take, but you're only really left with two options at this point. Make sanctions that are effective or remove them from the situation, and then you have a little bit more leverage to stand on because you're not worried with them. They want to be an isolated state. They want to do their own thing. They aren't interested with collaborating with other countries within the United Nations. Remove them. Those are your options. And let's see, 20 North Korean fishermen were also picked up adrift in the East Sea near Ulleungdo. That is a small islet off the east coast of Korea. And what was interesting about this story was, upon investigation, these men really earnestly wanted to go back to North Korea. They weren't trying to defect, they just got lost and wandered in the South Korean waters and, of course, were then repatriated. It was a fairly interesting story just because so many of the boats that are picked up in the East Sea are from defectors, especially this time of year when it is cold. and resources and food are more scarce in North Korea. In some East Asian news, China and Japan have danced a dangerous tango around the disputed islands called Senkaku or Diaoyu. In a response to a Chinese government plane that was encroaching over the area, Japan launched some fighters to intercept it. Holy smokes. This is getting crazy. And now that Abe is the Prime Minister-elect, things are possibly going to get worse. Many view him as a hawk, protecting Japan's image, protecting Japan's territory. And many don't know that what his intentions are going to be. He has come out and said that he wants to rewrite the Constitution of Japan to eliminate the phrase of a defense force, to call it a pure military. I mentioned this last week that you can call it whatever you want to call it. Japan has a military. Their fleet and their weapons are just on par with anybody else. A name change doesn't really do anything. Once you have the weapons, you can do anything you want. A lot of South Korean papers are also expressing some concern over Abe, but he has come out and said that he does want to work to relax relations and get them back to where they should be. So hopefully that will take place. And finally, China. Oh yes, China. China, in the second half of 2013, will launch the Chang'e 3, and it will land on the moon. And this will be a lunar rover and will spar probably a massive propaganda race to see who will set foot on the moon again. And here we go. It has been years, decades since anyone has been on the moon. Sure, we have landed rovers on Mars, and Curiosity is doing a fantastic job. But as inspiring as that is, getting behind a person standing on another planetary body is amazing. You get to hear and live the experience through them, through their actions, through their emotions, through their words and the pictures that they take. You can send a rover up, and an operator can sit in an office like this and look through a computer screen to take a picture. The pictures will be stunning, but in a lot of ways, it's not the same as if a human being was standing there, saw something, and snapped a picture. I really hope that manned spaceflight returns. There's a lot of risks involved with it. It's not a safe trip. But if we are going to explore, the best way to do it is by putting people up there who can think on their feet, who can evaluate things, who can actually relay the experience to the rest of us. Ladies and gentlemen, that is the news this week. Welcome back. It's time for the Content Rewind, and the first video up this week was, of course, Bourbon Bulgogi, a great article accompanying it on the Korea blog. I love bulgogi. It is so tasty. And this recipe was actually something that was given to us when we participated in the homestay program at the Korean Institute for Traditional Food. I altered it just a little bit by adding the bourbon, and oh, it was so good. You can watch the video. You can also go to the Korea blog to get the real recipe, as well as the changes I made to include the bourbon. I just had to include the bourbon. I was hankering for some good old American style barbecue. And it was just really, really tasty. So easy. Soy sauce, some sugar, honey, a little bit of pear juice if you want to go traditional, bourbon and water to go with it American style, some onions, some garlic. You marinate it for 30 minutes, boom, you throw it on the grill and you're done. It's so easy. A lot of times you serve it up with lettuce leaves and some rice and some ssamjang and just pop it in your mouth. we like to eat it with just rice and just mix it all in. It's so good. It was a lot of fun. Use the GoPro for that. Use the EduTeach mic for that as well. Really just a lot of fun to make these cooking videos. I have one more coming up, and I've written the article for that. I've done the recipe. We're going to probably shoot that on Friday, and yeah, you'll be seeing that in just a couple of days after watching or listening to the podcast. Tuesday's video, kimchi bokkeumbap. Oh yeah, baby, one of my favorites. And I think Joe's gonna actually do the cooking for that. She is a master chopper, She needs to go on Master Chef is what she needs to do. So we'll see what comes about with that. Some other things coming up this week. On Monday, I had an article about my appearances on Korea Today. The Thursday spot post-election was canceled because of all the issues going on with that. But I am still slated to appear Monday through Thursday during the upcoming week because of Tommy going on vacation. So I'm looking forward to going there. In fact, I'm slated to go in just a few hours to meet with the writers to plan out the 4 segments I'll be covering for her during those 4 days. Can't wait to do it. If you want to watch me live on television, you can do so by going over to Arirang's website. The link is in the blog article. And you can watch it live at their website, or if you have a smartphone, you can download the Android or iOS app and watch it on your phone. That's how I actually watch Arirang. I don't typically watch it on the computer, although during the election coverage I was watching it on the computer. But typically I watch it on my phone because it's just so easy. Just so easy. Friday's video, My Life Unexpected Journeys, is a new vlog concept I'm working on. Excuse me. I shot this while going out on assignment for Seoul Magazine. The article will actually appear in January's edition here in Korea about Hwacheon. And I wanted to do a video where I address a topic and then intercut it with different things going on that kind of relate to that. So the video is about unexpected journeys, things that pop up and change the course of your life and change the course of your actions and lead you down new paths and new discoveries. And seeing as how this journey out to Hwacheon was very much that. I got a phone call on the weekend. Hey, Steve, can you go do this for me? Sure, I will. Totally unexpected, changed my week up drastically, but it was a lot of fun, and I got to see a whole bunch of fun and amazing things. Had some great food out there. Oh my gosh, the samgyeopsal in Hwacheon to die for. Nice, thick cuts. They just explode with flavor in your mouth. They sizzle up great on the grill. Oh, just thinking back to it. It's been a food-flavored month. I got to tell you, it's fantastic. I also did a few different videos. One, a video response to Eric's Surf 6, the TV or the internet. I thought that was a great discussion. I had a lot of comments on that one. But one of the things I thought was interesting, a lot of people were commenting back saying that they prefer the internet, that they watch all their things on the internet. And I agree with that. I have television streamed to me via the internet, but the shows I watch are for television, and without television I wouldn't be able to watch it. So I think cable and satellite may be going the way of the dinosaur. In fact, here in Korea, most television broadcasting is distributed through internet. What was it? IPTV. IPTV is what we call it here. Internet Protocol Television. Streaming. High speed, high def, great stuff. So the notion that, I guess what I'm trying to say is I found it very interesting that people were distinguishing television broadcast production as a content creation medium and the delivery method. For me, I don't make the distinction. Whether I watch television on cable, whether I watch television on the internet, whether I watch television on my phone, it's still television. You have a big production company, you have that resource behind it that you just don't have. If you look at YouTube with all the different production houses, they have a lot of money, but it's not Universal, it's not Paramount, it's not Warner Brothers. You don't have that production company funding it. And you look at Doctor Who. I watched Doctor Who streamed to me. That is a television show. Everything about it screams. It is a television show. That, to me, is what TV is. National Geographic. Always fantastic shows. They do have web content, but it's not the same as a television produced show. So for me, I make the distinction between stuff that is produced for television and distributed through many different ways, and stuff that is produced specifically for the internet. I was alone in that opinion, but I thought it was a great discussion. I also released a video about fried chicken. Oh yeah, baby. Now this was another GoPro video. I shot it with the Polar Pro microphone. Now this microphone is something I picked up along the same times as the EduTeach microphone. This is an EduTeach microphone, by the way. I love it. It's a lapel mic. I plug it right into the camera. Beautiful. Anyway, it was a Polar Pro mic. I picked it up because it had a built-in dead cat for it. It's friggin' huge. But I read some so-so reviews for it, and I was looking for something that I could plug into the side of the camera that was smaller than the Rode microphone and get good sound. The sound from it is all right. However, like the EduTeach microphone, the 001 and I'm assuming the 006, when you're on buses or in low frequency areas, you get this rumbling, popping sound. So for me, it doesn't really do the job. I was hoping that using that microphone on the buses would eliminate the popping sound, but unfortunately, no, it's not. So I'm gonna have to find another alternative to that. But the fried chicken, oh, to die for! Oh my gosh, it is so, so good. It's called Gamaro Gangjong. It's a franchise here in Korea. They have two versions of it. They have a spicy and a sweet, 3 different sizes, and that's the menu. You have 3 size options, you have 2 flavor options, and that's it. Boneless chicken with a great marinade, served with little peanuts, little wooden forks you can actually pop in and eat it with. Cup size, medium, large. The thing that we really like about it is the chicken is fried, boneless chicken fried, and rather than being a soft breading or even like a crispy fried that you get at a fried chicken restaurant here in Korea, it is incredibly crunchy and tastes so good. And if you mix the sweet and the spicy, you get a wonderful flavor. It's wonderful. So you can watch that video, see the GoPro in action, see the Polar Pro in action as well. I would not recommend getting the Polar Pro. I think it's too big, it spins around too much, and you can hear some audio distortion in it. The EduTeach by far right now is the best mic I have found for the GoPro cameras. And finally, Instagram. Oh yeah, they caused a ruckus last week with their proposed change in terms of service. I released one video notifying people of the change. And I got some great retweets and some great discussion going. Once Instagram redacted their saying, I pulled that video down and uploaded a new video saying that, hey, they look like they're listening. I personally got what I was looking for in terms of having them address the issue. So currently, I am still using Instagram, but will hold off on deleting my account until I see the actual changes go into effect. I have started experimenting with Flickr, and I have to say, in terms of apps, I love the Flickr app for the iPhone. It is fantastic. Not only can you do a lot of the same filters, but you have so much more image control in the app than other camera apps. You can crop, you can change the contrast, the color, you can add some text to it. It's wonderful. I absolutely love it. I think it's fantastic. The ability to update your EXIF data, the maps, the what am I looking for? the groups. You not only have contacts, but you have groups as well. And the way that you can go through the photo streams is actually quite nice as well. You have a choice between the person. So all your contacts, you can scroll through their person. You get a chronological list of who posted last, and their photo feed is horizontal. You can swipe through it, or you can get a mosaic of everything uploaded that day. Great, and then you still have the ability to double tap and like or favorite an image. It's a brilliant app. And even if Instagram does go through with the changes and becomes a program I want to continue to use, I will probably still use Flickr because it's amazing. And then you have the groups, the subsets that you can join and participate in as well. Fantastic. If you haven't used the new Flickr app, really check it out, and I think you'll enjoy it. I really do. That, ladies and gentlemen, is the Content Rewind this week. We'll be back in just a moment. It is time for the Quintessential Quartet, and coming off the Instagram story, I thought I would focus on ownership, focus on intellectual property and copyright. So that's what this week's Quintessential Quartet is going to be. So I have the computer opened up, and I'm going to cover both intellectual property and copyright, and exactly what these are. So according to Wikipedia, we all know that when you talk about things from Wikipedia, you have to take it with a grain of salt. So here we go. Intellectual property, or IP, is a what does that say? Judicial. I would just say judicial, but a judicial concept which refers to creations of the mind for which exclusive rights are recognized. Under intellectual property law, owners are granted certain exclusive rights to a variety of intangible assets such as musical, literary, and artistic works, discoveries and inventions, and words, phrases, symbols, and designs. So that is what intellectual property is, stuff you create with your mind. And now a subset of that, of course, is copyright. So again, from Wikipedia, copyright is the legal concept enacted by most governments giving the creator of an original work exclusive right to it, usually for a limited time. See, intellectual property, you create it. It's yours. You are the first person to think about it. It's yours for life. Copyright is for a limited time. And generally, it is the right to copy, but also gives the copyright holder the right to be credited for their work, determine who may adapt the work in other forms, who may perform the work, who may financially benefit from it, and other related rights. It is a form of intellectual property, like the patent, the trademark, and trade secret, applicable to any expressible form of an idea or information that is substantive and discrete. So there you go. Here you go. Intellectual property is the big umbrella. Copyright is a subset of that. Now, essentially when we're talking about online, as soon as you create something online, say a video, a podcast, musical piece, it is not only your intellectual property, it is yours to do with as you please because you are the copyright holder. That doesn't change. This is where things got really funky with Instagram, point number 4. They said in the new terms of service that they don't own the images. And that was absolutely true. And this is what I think people didn't understand. They were saying, oh, Instagram now owns our pictures. And that was never the case. They can't take away the intellectual property. They can't take away your copyright. What Instagram was doing, and Facebook to a certain extent does the same thing, they said that you, by using the service, transfer an unlimited royalty-free license for them to use your work to sell. And that's what people were getting upset with. They weren't trying to steal your copyright. They were just essentially saying, if you use the site, you grant us unlimited permission without compensation to sell the works. And that's what people got upset about. And they were rightly to do so. One of the things that I don't like to do is share my work for free. And what I mean by that is if there is a photo contest out there, a lot of times I'll want to enter it, or a video contest, since I do a lot of video work now. I would love to participate in the contest. However, a lot of the contest rules, as you start scrolling through the terms of service or the terms and conditions of applying for the contest, state that by submitting the work to the contest, that organization either gets unlimited royalty-free use of the image or video, or they become the exclusive content distributor for it. A lot of times I have been asked why I don't participate in some of the contests here in Korea, and it's for that latter reason. By entering the contest, I can't share the video anywhere else. I essentially give all my rights to that video to that organizer, and that's just not something I'm willing to do. As a content creator, I make money from the videos that I put up on YouTube. I'm a YouTube partner, and that's one stream of income. It's led to many other streams of income, but I'm not willing to do something that's going to give my rights away. One of the things I didn't do while in the United States was apply for a contest by the National Park Service. They have the All-America Pass, and they were running a contest to where U.S. resident, I forgot, it's been years since this happened, but essentially they're running a contest and people could send in photos to the NPS, the National Park Service, and they were going to select, I believe, 12 photos to be featured on the National Parks All Access Pass. Great, you take a picture, it could show up on a card that is circulated around the United States. And the prizes were pretty good. However, when you looked at the terms of service, the terms and conditions of the contest, any image then became property of the National Park Service that they could use for anything that they wanted to. So if you had a really kick-ass image and you submitted it to the contest, the National Park Service could then sell it, could use it in their marketing without compensating you as the content creator. That was the terms and conditions of the contest. You agreed to it by entering the contest. And that was never something that I was really comfortable doing, because at that time I was struggling to become a photographer or a professional photographer in the United States, and it amounted to essentially giving my work away for free. I have no qualms about working with an organization and doing something for free, but simply, hey, here's a picture, it's for free. Not really happy about that. So, ladies and gentlemen, that is the Quintessential Quartet for this week. Kind of going into intellectual property rights, copyrights, and the whole Instagram issue. As I said, right now Instagram has retracted what they're saying, and if things go through, hopefully we'll be using Instagram for a long time, but if not, there are certainly other alternatives out there, and I have no problems nuking the account if they don't change their ways. Ladies and gentlemen, it is time to set course for adventure once more, and today I am joined on the line by an exciting traveler. She goes by the name of Kate Voyage. She runs the website 30traveler.com. Kate, welcome to the podcast.
Hello, thank you for welcoming me.
So how are you doing out there today? It's summer down in New Zealand.
I am doing very, very well. The weather has just warmed up in the last couple of days, and we're having a lovely day here today, so it's awesome.
I would gladly trade places with you, as it's below freezing here today. But we can't talk about the weather. We're here to talk about travel. So where are we going today?
We are going to Tonga, the Kingdom of Tonga in the South Pacific.
Ooh, and I have to share a quick story before you regale me with your information. I have a friend, and she is from New Zealand. And a few years ago, I think back in 2008, she was actually assigned to live on Tonga for 6 months. And at the time, I was like, what? I've never heard of this small island country. So I had to do a lot of research, and I was really intrigued with what I found out about it. So I'm really excited to hear what you have to share with us today. So tell us a little bit where Tonga is and something about it.
Yep, So it's a group of islands, and there are actually 176 islands in the group, and it's spread out across 500 miles lengthwise. And out of the 176 islands, there are only 52 that are inhabited, and they're basically four different island groups, and it's a really, really small place. So the total population across all of those islands is only about 100,000 people. Wow. And it's the only nation in the South Pacific region never to have been colonized. So if my research is correct, that is true. And as I said,
that's amazing.
The official name is the Kingdom of Tonga.
That's amazing. Number one, I was just amazing that it's never been colonized, given how proliferant, several European and Asian countries have gone into the South Pacific to accumulate land, but also just 100,000 people. The city I live in is only 6-7 years old, and we have close to 1 million people here now. So I don't know what it would be like to be in a place with only 100,000 people.
Yeah, so I grew up in a very small town in New Zealand, in the South Island of New Zealand, which is the least populated island of New Zealand, and the capital of Tonga feels like the small town that I grew up in. So it's a very, very small place, and it has the fact that it hasn't been colonized, it has its own very unique culture.
Oh,
it's quite amazing.
Oh, I can't wait to hear more about it. So you said there's 4 main areas that people kind of live in. So what are they? There
are 4 island groups that the nation is kind of divided up into. So the capital is called Nuku'alofa, and that's on the island of Tongatapu. So Nuku'alofa is like the name of the town, which is also the capital, and then the island that's on is Tongatapu, and that's where the international airport is. So all flights will be going into Tongatapu. Okay. And then there's another island that is quite close to Tongatapu Island, and it's really, really hard to pronounce. The spelling is EUA, and it's sort of pronounced Iowa. I have no idea if I'm even getting that correct, but that's considered its own sort of separate group. Okay. But it is really close to the main island, and so often people that aren't wanting to take domestic flights will just go to those 2 destinations because that's where you can get on a ferry without having to take a domestic flight. And then the other 2 island groups are Hapai, and that's where I went to, and that's about a 40-minute flight away. And then even further away is the Vavau group, and that's the most touristed group of islands. So it costs more to get to, it takes longer to get to, although not too long, and that's where people tend to go for the whale watching and more of the touristy activities.
Now, in addition to flights, you mentioned the Iowa, the EUA island group, that people sometimes ferry there. Can you take a ferry or a boat to the other island groups as well?
There's a ferry that goes to Hapai once a week, but there was a major ferry disaster, like a fatal disaster a few years ago on that route. So it's generally it's a very long ferry. It only goes once a week. So I personally wouldn't have been an option for me, but for someone that is on a really tight budget and has a lot of time, that might be one of the options. But I was a little bit concerned about the safety issues, more than a little bit concerned about the safety issues as well, because there was quite a large loss of life on that route a few years ago.
I can imagine. In terms, since we were talking about population just being 100,000 people, and being so close to New Zealand, is that the major source of income? What kind of industry is on the island?
Yeah, so there's very little kind of commerce on the island. So people the main source of income into the island is Tongans coming to New Zealand and working and sending money back to Tonga. Okay. So other than there are sometimes in New Zealand supermarkets you'll see coconuts that will say that they're They come from Tonga, but they're pretty much otherwise there aren't exports from Tonga. So what they export is basically their people, their labour into New Zealand, and Tongans who are working in New Zealand are often almost fully supporting their families back in Tonga.
Oh yeah, it's probably not uncommon. Like we see here in other Southeast Asian countries going abroad for better opportunities. Now, in terms of getting to Tonga, how did you get there? I mean, assuming that you flew in from New Zealand, but are there other ways to get into Tonga?
Yep. So there are the most frequent flights are from New Zealand, are from Auckland, and you can also fly from Sydney on Virgin Australia. So you can fly on Air New Zealand or Virgin from Auckland. You can fly on Virgin from Sydney, and Air Pacific also fly from Fiji. So those are your options.
Okay, very cool. Now, is there any problems getting through customs that on such a small place, or are they very welcoming towards tourists?
The customs is hilarious. They so all Tongans bring back massive quantities of food on the flight. So flying in from New Zealand, so many people had giant coolers of food, like those polystyrene coolers, and people were bringing back Kentucky Fried Chicken, KFC, all sorts of things. So the amount of stuff brought in was just incredible, and it was all just going through an X-ray machine. So that was very relaxed. And on the internal flights, I was a little bit worried because I've got a camping stove that uses meths, and I knew I wasn't going to be able to get meths on the small island group that I was going to, and I was thinking, I'm not going to be able to take my camping stove because I couldn't take meths on a flight. And in the end I didn't do that, but actually seeing how relaxed the security was on the domestic flights, it would have actually been no problem. So I was on a domestic flight with only three people, and I've heard stories that people take machetes as carry-on on domestic flights in Tonga. So I probably would have got away with anything, but I guess it's a bit dangerous.
Now on the domestic Tonga flights, what kind of aircraft are they? Prop jets, or are they more like the small regional jets we would see across New Zealand and other areas of the world?
There's a bit of variation. So there's one, I think, bigger plane that maybe seats 100 or something like that. But the plane that I went out on to the outer islands was a 6-seater plane, and only 3 of the seats were filled. Oh wow! So I was literally within arm's length of the pilot. So if I'd reached my arm out, I would have touched the pilot. And the other passengers were me, a nun, and a Catholic nun, and a young schoolgirl. And then on the way back, there was there's really bad weather the week that I was there, and a lot of the flights were getting cancelled, and so they ended up switching the schedule around so that the big plane that was coming back from Vavau stopped off at our island and picked up a few passengers that had been stranded on Hapai. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha. All right, so now that you got us into Tonga, what about places to stay?
It's such a small, tiny place. So all the options for everything, so options for places to stay, options for places to eat, those are really, really limited. And there's not, I'm used to traveling places like Southeast Asia and being able to get something that's really nice for around $30, US, or around about that much, or even less. And the pickings are just really slim for even on the main island. I stayed in a place called Sealer's Guest House, which was a really authentic experience. So there were lots of Tongan families staying there as well as some on the flight that I came in on. There was a guy who'd been an expat in Tonga previously, and he always stayed he was coming back for a Tongan wedding to see one of his students get married, and he was staying at Sealer's. So it's a place that's popular place to stay with lots of people, but there were issues that a lot of maybe especially Americans that are used to quite high standards and stuff might have had a problem with. Like there were animals that were inside, little cats, baby kittens that were kind of pooing and things inside, and people would come through and clean it up, but it was a bit of an issue. And some other travellers I'd met said that they'd stayed there and had a real problem with being woken up by roosters in the mornings and not being able to sleep. But I didn't have that problem, and I quite enjoyed it. But it was definitely a lower standard than I would have stayed at in places like Thailand.
So describe your room and the cost, so we can get an idea of the establishment.
Yeah, so costs are were really flexible. So it was about I stayed there for one night on my way through to the outer islands, and I stayed there for another night on my way back. And I was given the cost on the way back was half of what it was on the way, around about half of what it was on the way through. So I think I paid like 35 or 40 Tongan paenga on the way there. And then on the way back, it was 20 a night. So,
a little bit of discount. Now, was that just because of a day? Because I know, like, sometimes here in Korea and some other places like Las Vegas, you stay on the weekend, you pay a premium rate versus during the week when it's lower.
No, I'm pretty sure it was just because they liked me and that I was coming back. And it was like when I was doing my checkout, the lady who was checking me out said, "What price were you quoted?" And
it's free. It's free.
On the way back, she went and said, "Oh, we'll just go and check with like the old lady that owned the guest house cellar. We'll just go and check what price we should give you," kind of thing. So it's very flexible, and those kinds of things are really interesting about Tonga.
Oh, I bet. Now, as far as getting around, once you get to your island destination, what's the best way of traveling on the islands?
Yep. So, on the main island, I just arranged with the guest house to pick me up and take me from the airport to the guest house, and then they'll also help you out with a taxi, organising a taxi to get back to the airport. And then you can, in terms of walking around the main town, you're just going to be able to use your feet for that. And if you wanted to explore around the island of Tongatapu, you'd have to either hire a taxi for the day or hire a car, or find some sort of option for that. There is local bus service that you could take, but it would probably be a bit spotty, and issues like the last bus being quite early in the day and that kind of thing.
In terms of expense, what kind of how are the public transport rates? You mentioned taxi. Are the cost prohibitive, or is there a way, since they are kind of tourism driven? When I travel throughout Southeast Asia, usually I'll hire a car for a day or hire a driver for a day. Is that something that can be done there?
Yeah. So the South Pacific is way more expensive than Southeast Asia. So the prices are definitely a lot higher than Southeast Asia, but Tonga is one of, if not the cheapest place to go in the Pacific. So it depends on what you're comparing it to. Like if you're comparing it to places like Tahiti, or then it's a bargain. If you're comparing it to Thailand, then it's expensive.
Okay. All right. So what are some things to do while you're there?
So a lot of people go for whale watching, which is in Tonga in winter. So that's over like the middle of the year, sort of, I think it's June to September. I wrote this down as a note. June to November is whale watching season, and most people go to Bavau for that. So, but one of the kind of the catch-22 with Tonga is that in the winter it's not actually that warm there. So the temperatures will be like lows in the 60s and highs in the mid 70s, and the water temperature will be a bit cool. But the winter is the dry season, okay. And then summer is warmer, but it's rainy season, and boy does it rain. Like the week that I was there, a lot of flights were cancelled because of rain, and the weather was actually scary. It was so wet. Like I had the bungalow that I was staying in. the rain was actually coming in. The rain and the wind were coming into the bungalow.
Wow. Was it coming like through the roof or coming through the walls, or were the windows not tight? How was it coming through?
There was a little gap between the top of all of the way around. Like, it was obviously designed that way. There was a little gap between the roof and the top of the walls, and it was only like a really small gap, like maybe 3 inches or something like that. And there was a mosquito net above the bed, like one of those 4-poster kind of mosquito nets that had like a sheet at the top of the 4 posts, and that was getting drenched.
Oh, wow.
From rain and wind getting blown through that tiny little gap. So it really rained hard.
Okay. That is quite frightening, because I would be terrified to have that kind of experience. Not something I'd like to. Not something I would like to do. So I have to make a mental note not going during the summer rainy season there. What are some other things to do in Tonga?
Yep. So just kind of hanging out at the beach is a good thing to do. So the main place that I went was this tiny little island called Oliva, which is an island off an island. So you fly into Tongatapu, and then you fly to the main island of Hapai Group, and then I took a little boat over to this island called Oliva, and on that island there are no residents. There are 3 places to stay.
Wow.
2 of the places to stay are run by one person. So there's a place that's run by an American lady. There's a place that's run by a Tongan man, and then there's a place that's run by an elderly Tongan couple, and I stayed at the place run by the elderly Tongan couple. And when I went, there were no other tourists on the island, so it was just me and the lady. The American lady is kind of sometimes a little bit reclusive, so I never saw her. And I never saw the other guy. I just like, as I was walking around, their dogs would come out and bark at me a lot. So it was just me on this island. It was really definitely like a survivor type of experience.
Oh, wow.
But it was completely amazing. Like, it did feel like I had the island to myself. There were lots of animals walking around. So obviously the interior of the island is all kind of jungly, and then there'd be pigs and cows and things walking around around this interior of the island. And I had to, where the accommodation is on the rough side of the island, where the sea was really rough.
Okay.
And so to walk over to the side of the island where the sea was dead calm was over an hour walk. So I was trekking around on this completely deserted island on my own, and I went as a solo traveller, so I was really on my own, and it was an amazing decompression experience, but definitely by far the most adventurous thing that I've done.
Oh, it sounds amazing. Before we wrap things up here, I want to talk to you about food on the island. What would you recommend in terms of things to try or things to avoid?
Yeah, so the food is really limited. So on the Hapai Group, the soil is sand, so they have a lot of trouble growing anything. So there literally are no fruits or vegetables available to purchase. So they pretty much survive on root crops and meat. So that's their main diet. Mm-hmm. So this is sort of like a more expensive place to stay, run by an expat couple, and they have food available for tourists. Like, they have a bread maker where they make their own pizzas, and they ship the cheese and things in to provide food for their guests. But generally, you'll be wanting to bring your own food. There are some supermarkets and some sort of mini supermarkets in the capital, and there's also a market in the capital where they sell fruit. So when I went was mango season, so that the advantage of it being I got rainy season, but I also got mango season, and the mangoes were literally all over the ground because the place was just raining mangoes. So I got a great big bag of like 15 mangoes for like $1 or something like that.
Oh, nice. Fantastic.
Yeah. So it's local eating. It's really what local eating means. The only things they have to sell at the market are what's in season, and then they have some supermarkets with a limited range of things that get shipped in from New Zealand. Like you can buy chocolate bars and cereal and those and bread and those kinds of things.
Okay. Well, Kate, thank you very much for joining us this week on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is Kate Voyage. You can find all of her information over at QiRanger.com by clicking on the show links. Her website is 30traveler.com, and you can also follow her on Twitter, of course, at 30traveler. Kate, again, thank you very much. I am jazzed to one day head to Tonga.
Cool. All right, well, let me know when you are planning it, and I'll give you some even more tips.
Super. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much.
That will just about do it for this week's podcast. I would very much like to thank Kate Voyage for joining us this week on Set Course for Adventure. Again, you can find all of our links in the show notes. But until next time, please let me know how you think about the podcast, what you think about the podcast. You can send that feedback to me at podcast@QiRanger.com. You can send questions to me at questions@QiRanger.com. And to keep up with all my adventures here in Korea and around the world, follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. QiRanger there. So you guys have a great holiday week. I'll be back next week for the last podcast of the season. Yes, normally they're 20 episodes long, but we're going to cut it short just a little bit. So next week, episode 19, season 3, will be the last QiRanger podcast this year. All right, have a good one. Remember to be true to yourself and always be awesome.